From the very first moments of existence, barely having entered the world, humans actively begin to absorb information from their surroundings. Gradually, step by step, an understanding forms of what is generally accepted, what societal expectations are, and most importantly, how to harmoniously integrate into a complex system that tirelessly shapes one's personality, often without conscious participation. However, in the course of this comprehensive process, imperceptibly to themselves, individuals risk losing something incomparably valuable, the precious connection to their authentic self, that profound essence hidden in the deepest corners of their psyche. The great thinker and psychoanalyst Carl Jung dedicated his life to tirelessly exploring this profound mystery. He sought to decipher the invisible yet powerful language of the unconscious, revealing to humanity the truth. If one genuinely and deeply loves oneself, they simply have no right to settle for anything less than what they truly deserve. But how do we know what that is, and why do we sometimes prevent ourselves from attaining it? Haven't we all encountered moments when, outwardly, a situation seemed perfectly acceptable, even prosperous, yet deep within an unbearable emptiness was felt, as if something vitally important had been irrevocably lost? Perhaps this manifested in relationships where one gave relentlessly, receiving nothing in return, depleting their emotional resources, or in a job that, despite its external stability, brought no satisfaction, yet a paralyzing fear of the unknown and change forced one to stay. Perhaps it was an environment that, instead of inspiring and uplifting, seemed to dim one's inner light, stifling individuality and the spark of talent, turning life into a dull routine. A natural question arises: why do people, consciously or unconsciously, allow such circumstances to shape their reality? The great Jung, a visionary of the human soul, would point out that the key to unlocking this paradoxical tendency lies in the concept of the shadow, that hidden, often unflattering part of the human personality that many stubbornly prefer to ignore or overlook entirely. And this is where it gets interesting, understanding how this shadow influences our lives and how, by acknowledging it, we can finally achieve what we desire. From the earliest years of life, people are often taught to suppress their true emotions and strictly adhere to accepted patterns that often do not align with their authentic selves. As a result, individuals frequently transform into who they believe others want them to be. However, everything that is suppressed does not vanish without a trace. Instead, it deeply hides in the subconscious realm known as the shadow, and subsequently manifests in entirely unpredictable ways. This can express itself in making poor decisions, forming destructive relationships, and engaging in cyclical behavior patterns that trap individuals, even if they are unaware of their true causes. What an individual stubbornly refuses to confront within themselves will inevitably appear externally, often taking on the guise of predetermined fate. This is why, despite expressing a sincere desire for love, success, or true happiness, people often find themselves in circumstances that, paradoxically, distance them from these cherished aspirations. Deep within the human psyche, there exists a part that is still unable to fully accept the idea that one truly deserves these blessings. However, genuine personal transformation begins only when an individual gathers the courage to look into their inner world, when they stop seeking answers in external manifestations and start to comprehend the depths of their own unconscious. Essentially, the eminent psychoanalyst Carl Jung asserted that the unconscious is not an adversary or a source of threat, but rather acts as an important messenger, carrying valuable information. Everything an individual experiences and encounters in the external world, according to his teachings, is merely a mirror reflection of processes occurring within themselves. If a person continues to settle for less than they truly deserve, it is because there is still an element of doubt, fear, or an incomplete awareness of their true worth within their inner world. Imagine for a moment someone waking up and realizing with astonishing clarity that the answers to quests previously directed outward have always resided within the depths of their own being. At that moment, it becomes evident that there is no longer a pressing need for external approval, No need to prove anything to the world, for inner completeness and self-sufficiency are already present. However, merely conceptualizing this fact is insufficient. True understanding requires a deep empirical experience. Such an experience originates with a conscious choice. It is the decision to delve into the depths of self-knowledge, to bravely confront one's shadow, the hidden aspects of the personality, and finally, to firmly refuse to compromise, to stop settling for less. When an individual makes the decision to unconditionally love themselves, a fundamental transformation occurs in all areas of their existence. This change is not the result of some mystical magic, but stems from the fact that all actions and decisions begin to be formed on a fundamentally different basis from an inner conviction. One stops being satisfied with merely superficial and fleeting connections, for deep within they recognize their true worth and the need for genuine emotional depth. They refuse to tolerate work that brings neither joy nor satisfaction, because they come to understand that their purpose and true aspirations extend far beyond the ordinary. The individual stops excusing or tolerating unkind or abusive treatment, for the enduring value of their own person has been revealed to them. However, it must be acknowledged that this path of inner transformation and self-acceptance is by no means easy. The renowned thinker Carl Jung, who profoundly explored the human psyche, warned that the process of individuation, that is, the attainment of the true self, the becoming of a whole person, invariably requires extraordinary courage. Not everyone is ready to walk this thorny path, for it entails the necessity to resolutely let go of those self-perceptions that were previously adopted or created, and to dare to face the authentic essence of one's own being. Such a path implies abandoning outdated beliefs, bravely confronting deeply ingrained fears, and critically re-evaluating everything learned during upbringing and socialization. A significant number of people prefer to remain in the zone of the familiar and known, even if it is associated with constant suffering and dissatisfaction, because the prospect of encountering the unknown and uncertain evokes a deep, paralyzing fear within them. But how long is an individual willing to continue settling for a situation that clearly falls short of their true potential? How many more times will they seek justifications for what deep down feels incongruous or unworthy? How long will one continue to silence that rebellious inner voice that persistently insists on the existence of something much greater? Life, by its very nature, will not patiently wait for the external world or some authoritative instance to grant permission for a full, deserved life. There is no single ideal moment, nor will any mystical, divine sign appear to precisely indicate the optimal time for fateful changes. In fact, the only true guide that is truly necessary has long resided within each individual. This manifests as a constant feeling of inner discomfort, a vague but persistent sense that something in the current situation does not quite align with one's true essence, or a deep, sometimes aching longing for something significantly larger and more meaningful. To ignore this silent call would be a mistake. This is precisely how the individual's unconscious enters into dialogue with them, gently yet firmly guiding them toward their authentic, true path. When an individual finally decides to listen to this inner voice, when they gain enough courage to let go of what no longer genuinely resonates with them and has ceased to serve their growth, something truly amazing and transformative happens. All elements of their life gradually begin to fall into place, forming a harmonious picture. Exactly the right people appear on the horizon, unique opportunities arise, and new doors open. And this happens not because the surrounding world has suddenly magically transformed, but solely because fundamental changes have occurred within the individual themselves. This is the result of realizing that genuine, deep self-love is incompatible with constant compromise and settling for anything less than what one truly deserves. And it is important to remember that this is just the beginning of a grand and fascinating journey. As one begins to understand their own worth, the trajectory of their life inevitably transforms. Actions cease to stem from compulsion or need, giving way to conscious choice. The great thinker Carl Jung taught that many relationships and circumstances attracted into our lives serve as a mirror reflection of what remains unhealed within us. If throughout life an individual has settled for less than what is rightfully theirs, it is because deep within their being there still lurks a part that sincerely believes this is the limit of their possibilities. However, the truth is that such a belief is not reality. It is merely a learned story, a kind of psychological conditioning instilled in the mind through past experiences, inherited views, or a deep-seated fear of loneliness. The unconscious is immensely powerful. It acts like a mighty magnet, attracting situations that confirm our internal beliefs. If one is deeply convinced of their own inadequacy, they will inevitably attract people into their life who reinforce this feeling of inferiority. Similarly, if the belief has taken root in one's mind that love is associated with pain, they will unconsciously seek out precisely those relationships that confirm this painful premonition. It is for this reason that so many people find themselves trapped in seemingly endless, repetitive patterns. They change partners, professions, even cities, yet the same fundamental problems stubbornly resurface. This happens because the true root of the difficulties is not external, it is hidden within. What does not receive healing is not faced and is not integrated into the individual's psyche will continuously manifest in various forms until it is finally acknowledged. Recognizing this truth is often fraught with considerable difficulty. There will be periods when an individual feels an irresistible urge to return to familiar patterns because the unknown can inspire deep fear. Their mind, striving for perceived safety, will persistently suggest that the familiar evil is preferable to the unknown good. However, this belief is the greatest of all delusions. The so-called comfort zone is not a refuge at all. It is merely an arena of stagnation, artfully disguised as stability and perceived security. And the longer a person remains in this captivity, the more they postpone the onset of the authentic life intended for them. The distinguished thinker Carl Jung asserted that the integration of the shadow is one of the cornerstones on the path to achieving a full and truly authentic life. The shadow, according to his teaching, includes all those facets of the personality that have been suppressed, rejected, or carefully hidden because at some point one was led to believe that they were unacceptable to society or to oneself. Often, a manifestation of this shadow is the willingness to settle for much less than what the individual truly deserves. Such behavior allows limiting beliefs to dictate the terms of existence instead of boldly confronting them and transforming them into something constructive. It is at this point that true, profound self-work begins. The essence of the solution does not lie in attempting to change others, in passively awaiting more favorable treatment from the world, or in forcing anyone to acknowledge one's significance. The true key lies in internal work, in impartially challenging ingrained beliefs, in carefully observing one's own behavioral patterns, and in sincerely questioning the roots of one's fears. When an individual delves into this deep self-exploration, something fundamental within them transforms. Irreversible processes of change are set in motion. And as the individual changes from within, their entire environment also begins to undergo transformation. One's interpersonal relationships begin to take on a completely different character. They stop pursuing emotionally unavailable individuals because the internal need for external approval simply vanishes. Spaces where there was previously a strong need to conform and fit in now begin to feel alien and foreign, for one's sense of self is no longer tied to external acceptance or others' opinions. The individual learns to act with increasing confidence, making decisions rooted in deep self-love and self-respect rather than in a paralyzing fear of the unknown or judgment. And here, a truly astonishing phenomenon unfolds. Carl Gustav Jung, the renowned thinker, spoke of synchronicity, a phenomenon where meaningful events begin to align in an almost mystical way when an individual is in complete harmony with their true self. The moment one begins to deeply respect themselves, recognize their worth, and treat themselves with the dignity they undoubtedly deserve, the universe invariably responds. New opportunities then arise, previous connections transform, and hitherto unknown paths open up. Not because these paths and opportunities didn't exist before, but because the individual is now able to clearly recognize and eagerly accept them. However, the catch is that many people tend to wait for external validation before embarking on deep internal transformation. They remain frozen, waiting for the world to confirm their own worth before daring to fully trust their inner significance. But the truth is different. Fundamental changes originate precisely within the individual. First, one must genuinely believe in themselves, first choose themselves, first provide for all their own needs, and only then will the surrounding world begin to reflect this internal metamorphosis, manifesting it externally. It must be understood that this process of transformation is neither instantaneous nor strictly linear. Undoubtedly, there will be periods when an individual feels clear progress, but then there will also be days when they will doubt everything. There will be moments when the familiar and known seems extremely tempting, when the natural discomfort accompanying growth and development will force one to consider settling for what is already known and comfortable. However, whenever faced with such doubts, it is important to remember a fundamental principle. Self-love is not a destination, it is a continuous daily practice. It is not something that just happens, it is a conscious choice made every day. When one decides to live guided by this inner perspective, their life transforms not because external circumstances immediately change their essence, but because their very way of interacting with these circumstances fundamentally changes. When one truly begins to accept and value themselves, they inevitably discover a curious pattern. Those people and life situations that previously elicited only tolerance or even resignation are now perceived as absolutely unbearable. What was once justified in their mind now appears with crystal clarity, without any illusions. And what they once tried to rationalize or explain is now understood for what it truly is, in its authentic essence. This profound transformation occurs not because the external world has changed, but solely because of internal changes within the individual. It is at this moment that many face a truly pivotal challenge that determines their future path. The moment an individual realizes they have long settled for less than what was rightfully intended for them, a dilemma inevitably arises. They must make a choice, either continue along the well-worn path, driven by apprehension of the unknown and fear of impending change, or dare to take a decisive step for their own well-being, even if it means letting go of what no longer resonates with their inner essence. However, the process of such liberation is often fraught with considerable difficulties and serious internal resistance. As the distinguished psychoanalyst Carl Jung aptly noted, the human psyche instinctively clings to established patterns and familiar states, for any transformation inevitably leads into the realm of the unknown, and it is precisely the unknown that can awaken our deepest, primal fears. Nevertheless, there is a simple yet extremely important truth that few are willing to vocalize. Nothing truly valuable and significant can enter one's life as long as they continue to cling to what has long lost its relevance and no longer belongs to them. It is beneficial for everyone to take a moment to survey their daily life. One should carefully examine their interpersonal relationships, the environment in which they exist, and their overall lifestyle. It is important to ask oneself with complete candor, is all of this truly a genuine reflection of their authentic self? Does their soul find peace in the current state of affairs, or are they in a constant struggle with circumstances that, deep down, they feel are alien and not meant for them? It is very easy to succumb to the temptation of routine, to find comfort in the familiar and predictable. However, if an individual stubbornly clings to what no longer evokes an inner response, the only result of such persistence will be stagnation in an existence that, in essence, does not belong to them. Life constantly sends signals, subtle hints about the need for change. These signals can manifest as draining interpersonal connections, professional activities that exert oppressive pressure, or a social circle whose members no longer resonate on the same frequency as one's own vibrations. However, all these indications lose their value if one chooses to ignore them. Their unconscious continuously dialogues with them. Every time an individual feels emotionally drained after interacting with someone, every time their intuition quietly whispers that a certain environment is not suitable for them, every time an inexplicable feeling of anxiety and unease arises within them, This is their psyche striving to point the right way. The true question is one willing to listen to these internal messages? According to Carl Jung's profound teachings, the process of individuation, that very becoming of the authentic self, invariably requires one to pass through periods of deep solitude, agonizing uncertainty, and overwhelming doubt. This is because when an individual consciously rejects what they are not, they must cross a certain empty space before they can discover what truly belongs to their essence. It is noteworthy that many people are strongly reluctant to step into this void. They often prefer to cling tightly to the familiar and known, even if it causes them clear harm or hinders their development. However, this emptiness is not an enemy on the path to self-knowledge. On the contrary, it represents a sacred, almost mystical space where something completely new and transformative can enter. It is, in essence, a bridge connecting the life lived with the life one truly desires to embody. It offers a unique opportunity to rebuild everything from the ground up, completely freeing oneself from the limiting shackles of the past. Once an individual finally makes the courageous decision to let go of the old and outdated, something truly extraordinary happens. Their inner energy undergoes radical changes, their consciousness gains astonishing clarity, and suddenly the individual begins to attract situations and opportunities that previously seemed absolutely unattainable. This happens not because these situations were impossible before, but because the person was excessively preoccupied with holding on to what was never truly their own or a part of their authentic essence. The universe, as is known, invariably responds and bestows blessings upon those who possess enough courage and determination to align with their deepest truth and live in harmony with it. However, reaching the desired destination requires paying a certain price. Not so much in the sense of making sacrifices, but in the context of liberating oneself from everything that does not correspond to one's true essence. This includes letting go of limiting beliefs, breaking ties with relationships that have ceased to be a source of support, and overcoming fears that hold one back from moving forward. Many, however, are not ready to pay this price, for it demands a ruthless level of self-analysis and honesty with oneself. One must look in the mirror and ask very uncomfortable questions. It is necessary to ascertain why one continues to remain in circumstances that, as they know, are not their true calling. One should reflect on which part of their personality has hindered their own development. It is important to understand what internal narratives have prevented them from striving for what they truly deserve, making them settle for less. This process does not tolerate simplifications or hasty solutions. There are no magic formulas or instant panaceas. There is only one immutable truth. Genuine self-love excludes the possibility of remaining in a state of complacency. It is unacceptable to continue betraying that part of one's essence that has not yet recognized its true worth and potential. However, the state of affairs can transform immediately in the present moment. For true awareness is not a distant future prospect. It arises the very second one decides to see and act according to genuine reality. The individual does not need to wait for any external confirmation that the time for transformation has come. They do not require approval from others. The person does not need additional instructions or omens. The only necessary sign is already deep within each individual. It is that inner unrest, that insatiable yearning for something more significant, that silent conviction that one was created for much greater accomplishments. Genuine self-love is not merely a superficial concept of self-esteem. It is a fundamental, decisive action to bring oneself into complete alignment with who one truly is, without any concessions, without unnecessary justifications, and without a shadow of fear. Such a willful decision is the most powerful manifestation of freedom available to a human being, and when an individual makes this momentous decision, life itself has no choice but to reciprocate. The moment one begins to harmonize their existence with their authentic self, they realize that self-love is by no means just an aesthetically pleasing idea. It is a colossal force capable of transforming all aspects of their surroundings. This is not a fleeting feeling nor a set of affirmations to be mechanically repeated in front of a mirror. It is a profound internal revolution that fundamentally alters an individual's way of thinking, manner of speech, decision-making process, and overall behavior. In this deep process, the first thing that inevitably occurs is that the individual gains exceptional clarity of perception. Circumstances previously excused under the pretext of their relative tolerance suddenly become unbearable. Relationships that were passively endured now appear completely unacceptable. This sensation is akin to an invisible veil being lifted from one's eyes, revealing reality in its pristine, undistorted form. Such an awakening can cause significant discomfort, for it brings the realization of how often one has settled for far less than what they truly deserved. However, it's impossible to transform what remains hidden, and once this truth is revealed, an individual can never again ignore it. The renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung once astutely observed that the process of individuation is comparable to waking from a deep, prolonged sleep. Initially, the light is blinding, causing palpable discomfort, and at times even physical pain. But once the eyes adjust to the new illumination, the desire to return to the former darkness vanishes forever. Yet it is at this stage that many individuals find themselves stuck. They recognize the truth, but don't know how to act upon it. They find themselves trapped in limiting behavioral patterns, in draining relationships, and in professional activities that gradually dull their spirit. Still, they are paralyzed by an overwhelming fear of the unknown, for even though the old ways no longer serve them, they are at least familiar and predictable. This is where the great test arises, to move forward, bravely stepping into the unknown, or to cling tightly to what is already well known. Does one trust that by letting go of what no longer resonates with their soul, they will create space for something better, or do they prefer to remain in a seemingly safe haven, even at the cost of their own peace and emotional balance? True self-love is not only the recognition of one's own worth, but also the active demonstration of that worth through actions. Every time an individual settles for less or compromises, they are sending a signal to the universe that, in their opinion, this is precisely what they deserve. The universe, in turn, invariably responds to the vibrations that the individual emits. If someone continues to surround themselves with people who do not appreciate them, if they remain immersed in situations that deplete their inner reserves, if they allow their inner light to dim in things that do not bring them meaning, it is because deep within their subconscious, something still believes that such a state of affairs is perfectly acceptable. However, what is considered commonplace is far from always being the right path. Carl Jung, the distinguished thinker, taught that the unconscious unequivocally points to what requires deep healing. It reveals itself in cyclical patterns of behavior through situations that seem to relentlessly repeat and relationships that invariably lead to the same outcome. This happens not because fate has turned against the individual, but because the depths of their psyche seek to teach them a valuable lesson. Each time a person encounters such a recurring scenario, it becomes a powerful impetus for self-reflection. What are they still tolerating that they long shouldn't be? In what areas are they suppressing their authentic self? In what aspects of their life are they still compromising, settling for less than what they truly desire? The external world, in essence, is merely a reflection of one's inner landscape. It is impossible to expect respect from others if one does not first demonstrate proper self-respect. One should not expect others to value them until they have learned to value themselves. True affection and love will not come if one continues to settle for mere fleeting displays of attention. However, when an individual makes a conscious decision to genuinely love themselves, not just in words but by demonstrating it through concrete actions and deeds, then everything around them begins to transform. They gain the ability to set personal boundaries without experiencing guilt or discomfort. They learn to confidently say no without fearing the loss of someone's approval or favor. One realizes that the state of solitude ceases to be a punishment, transforming instead into a sacred and secluded space where they can fully reconnect with their inner self. And at this moment, something truly amazing happens. the universe begins to reciprocate, because when an individual transforms their own energy, everything that no longer aligns with their new elevated vibration gradually begins to dissolve and disappear from their life. And although this process may initially be accompanied by certain painful experiences, it is, without a doubt, an absolutely necessary stage. True self-love is not only the art of attracting favorable events and things into one's life. It is also the manifestation of the courage needed to release and leave behind everything that is not meant for them. It is in this act of liberation and letting go of the past that authentic personal transformation begins. When an individual decides to release what no longer resonates with their inner world, when they stop settling for less than what rightfully belongs to them, something in their soul undergoes irreversible changes. They are no longer the same person. They are no longer capable of accepting unfair treatment, cannot ignore their own inner voice or intuitive insights, nor can they dim their own light merely to fit someone else's expectations. However, it is precisely at this moment that many face the most serious challenge: uncertainty. For the act of letting go inevitably leads to a void. This requires deep faith that something more favorable will surely come, even when its outlines are not yet visible on the horizon. And such a state demands a level of inner confidence and self-trust that few are willing to cultivate within themselves. As the distinguished thinker Jung taught, the unconscious operates not through categories of logic, but through the language of symbols and the phenomena of synchronicity. And when one takes this decisive step, when they finally choose in favor of their own being, when they decide to act guided by their authentic value and dignity, life begins to respond in ways that previously seemed unimaginable. Opportunities once perceived as unattainable begin to manifest. People who truly resonate with one's inner world appear in their surroundings. What previously felt like a continuous struggle transforms into a harmonious and natural flow. However, this is not magic. It is a phenomenon based on internal congruence. It is the manifestation of a new reality rooted in a renewed self-perception. For the external world invariably serves as a mirror of what is happening within a person's inner world. When one still finds it difficult to release something or let go of a situation, they should reflect on a series of profound questions. How would their life radically change if they possessed absolute, unwavering certainty that they are self-sufficient? What different decisions would they make if the fear of being alone no longer controlled them? What would they do differently if they knew without the slightest doubt that the universe invariably and comprehensively supports them every step of the way? Self-love, as is known, is not a final destination or an achieved endpoint. It is rather a continuous journey, a constant forward movement. It is a daily commitment one makes to oneself, an unwavering affirmation of one's own worth. It is the resolve never to settle for anything less than what one, in their deepest conviction, truly deserves. And in this process of self-discovery and acceptance, they are by no means isolated.